Well, good morning. I hope you're all doing well here in Fulton and wherever you find yourself around this world or through Facebook. Welcome today. We're in the midst of this series called Crazy Talk. Actually, how many of you were here last weekend? All right, for those of you that weren't, I want to encourage you to go online to lookingforachurch.org and pick up and see what Pastor Dave preached about last weekend, because what Pastor Dave preached about last weekend really is the foundation for what's going to happen over the rest of this series. Because last week, Pastor Dave took us to what Jesus said about a very important thing, about what he had come to do. And here's the passage that I don't want us to miss. Last week, Dave shared with us what Jesus said when he said these words: unless your righteousness is better than the righteousness of the teachers of religious law and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. And if you were happen to find yourself on that mountainside on that day when Jesus said those words, you would have thought, oh no, I'm toast. Because we've all probably been around people who are glad to be the definers of what faith looks like and who look at you and tell you, you don't qualify. Anybody else been blessed that way before in life, right? You know? And they are glad to, and when they are sort of in control, and as Pastor Dave said last week, remember, this is talking about sort of the Pharisees and these teachers. Do you remember what percentage of the Jewish population was Pharisees? There's some people paid attention last week, Dave. All right, 5%, yeah. So 5% of the people had decided they were going to be the definers of what faith looked like. And every religious group has these people who say this is what faith looks like. In fact, there are wars going on. There are people dying at this very moment around this planet because somebody has said this is what faith looks like and you don't fit, so you do not deserve to live. But here's the thing that we can miss because we're at this point and we're looking back and we don't understand. When Jesus says these words, they would have thought, oh no, but here, Jesus is not saying you have to be better than these really good people, because that's what we think he's saying. But that's not what Jesus is saying. What Jesus is saying is you have to be better than these people who claim it's their prerogative to define what faith and practice look like. And that's a whole different story, isn't it? Not better than what they say it, but better than when they say this, how they live it out. Because for Jesus, and what he's looking for is the answer to this. How is that possible? How is that possible? Because we know we don't measure up. How is that possible? And Jesus, if you got a little note there, I encourage you to write this down. This is important. Jesus says it's by reclaiming righteousness from right living to living right. And see, I thought that was a really good point. Gilbert, is that a pretty good point? I thought that was a very important point. From right living to living right, because Jesus is going to talk about, for the rest of this sermon, he is going to talk about intent. Not what you do, but why you do what you do. Not about not doing any of the wrong stuff, but he's going to talk about actually always trying to do the right thing. It's not about being safe. It's about being present. It's about being righteous. Righteous in the sense that it comes from a place in our heart. It comes from a life that's been transformed and renewed. And so that's the important point, because when Jesus looks at this and when he sets up for everything we're going to look at today and for the next few weeks, it is all about Jesus trying to help them answer this question. How in the world, Jesus, how is that possible when you say we're supposed to be more righteous than these people who have already set the bar for righteousness? And Jesus is going to say, this is how. Because you're going to have heard it said this way, and I'm going to tell you something different. So let me give you a little warning for today and for the next few weeks. Some of you are going to be very uncomfortable. Some today, some next week, and some in the following weeks. And I want you to hear me clearly today. That is okay, all right? Because this is not Jesus trying to shame us. This is not Jesus trying to point at us. This is not Jesus trying to say, you're bad, oh, you're really bad. You know, this is not Jesus pointing out that stuff. This is Jesus trying to change their minds and to capture their hearts and help them see a different way of living. That it's not just about right living, but it's about living right. So everybody ready? Yeah, that's what I figured we're at. All right. So let's pray, and then we're going to jump into it, all right? Lord, on this moment and on this day, we find ourselves in lots of different places. Some of us find ourselves here, and we are feeling like everything is going great with our experience with you and experience of the people around us and our job and our schooling and our friends and our relationships. And there's others of us in this room that find ourselves in the opposite end, that nothing seems to be going right. But the truth of the matter is, we all find ourselves in the exact same spot today. And that is that there is always room for improvement. And it's to be reminded again that while improvement is what you're hopeful for us, it's not the end of what you're after for us. That your goal for us has always been to trust you. To trust you completely. And so I just ask for myself today that as I'm kind of twisted today, as I'm kind of made to feel a little uncomfortable today by your words, Jesus, that you would just help me to trust you through it. To see your goal in my life and all of our lives as getting us to that place where we trust you unconditionally, that we trust you through everything, and that we see your hand at work even when we can't see it. So today we just ask you to speak into this place and this space and into our lives, and to use this time for your glory in your name. Amen. If you want to follow along, take out a Bible or take out your app and go to Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 through 26. As usual, I typically preach from the expanded version of the Bible because it gives us a little bit bigger picture. And here's what Jesus said. After telling them that your righteousness has to exceed those that have claimed this is what righteousness looks like, Jesus says these words. You've heard that it was said to our people long ago, you must not murder. And everybody that day said, yeah, we'd heard that, right? I mean, it was one of the big 10, right? Thou shalt not murder. And so we've heard it. And he said, you've heard that. And you've also heard that anyone who murders another will be subject to the judgment. And they all would have said, amen, that's right. Because while it wasn't one of the big 10, it was an explanation. And what Jesus is saying here is that in every town, there was this court set up of 7 judges. They were picked from among the people everybody thought were not only smart, but who were wise, who were sensitive. And this was the group you would come before. If in your interaction with somebody had died, you would come to this court. And it was there to make your case. Did you murder this person? Was it self-defense? Was this an accident? And if you know much about the Old Testament, there was also this law that said, if you killed somebody, back then if you killed somebody, they wanted to kill you back. That's right. It was kind of an eye for an eye. You take my life, somebody's going to take your life, then we're going to be even. But you know how that goes. The history has told us that never works out good because what happens? Everybody ends up dying. That's right, because, it's last man standing or last woman standing at that point. But they had this thing set up that if these judges said, you know what, we've decided that you did not intend for this to happen, it was just a terrible accident, it was self-defense or whatever, in order to save yourself, you could go to one of these cities of refuge. It's a whole other conversation. But this is the place they would come to get that worked out. And everybody that day understood with Jesus. We're not supposed to murder somebody, and if that happens, we go to this court, and they decide the judgment. So Jesus got everybody on the same page. Then he says these words, But I tell you, if you are angry, that is, you continue to be angry, that is, you harbor malice with a brother or sister, you will be subject to judgment. If you're angry. How do you feel about your intent being judged as much as your actions? It's funny that some of you have Bibles, and if you have older Bibles, none of the newer translations, but the older Bible, you might actually find in this particular verse a little disclaimer. It says, without cause. To which if you have a modern version, it will give you a little footnote and say, some later manuscripts add this. Do you know why it adds it? Because everybody gets angry. And we don't want to feel like every time we get angry, it's like we murdered somebody, so we have to add, somebody added someplace without cause, because that makes us feel better, because I always have cause. That's right. We are great at justifying, right? We always have a reason. If you didn't do this, I wouldn't get so mad. If they hadn't cut me off, I wouldn't have yelled at them. If you just weren't such an idiot, which we'll get to in a moment. And so everybody in the group has the same response we do. Whoa, Jesus, you're going to tell me when I get angry, when I get mad at somebody, then I'm subject to judgment? And he goes on. If you say fool to a brother or sister, you will be subject to judgment by the council. This is the Sanhedrin. This is a bigger group, not just that local court, but it's a bigger group. And if you call someone an idiot, that is a moron, you will be in danger of the fire of hell. Now, I don't know about you, but when I read this, I wish there was an option between court and hell, right? I wish there was sort of another layer to that, right? But Jesus doesn't give us another layer. I mean, think about it. Think about your commute this last week. Anybody subject to judgment from this week? I mean, we look at this and we say, what are you doing to us, Jesus? I mean, Jesus, I imagine someone in the crowd's like, hey, Jesus, got a question for this, because what do you mean I can't call him a fool or an idiot? Because, Jesus, you know as well as I do that some people are idiots, right? I mean, how can I not call them what they are? To which Jesus is trying to get us to understand there's something bigger going on here. Something bigger than our emotions, something bigger than our thoughts, something bigger than our words. And it's the impact of those things, not just on them, but on ourselves. In fact, these words, this idea of fool, is kind of this person that's just, our word idiot today would much be the first word when he talks about fool, this idea of raka. It literally means this, to spit out. You just see somebody just spit out this, you are such an idiot. It's that kind of thing. He says that's when you're in trouble counsel. And here when it says idiot or moron, in this particular passage, it's really this broader idea of somebody who has sort of just stepped away from faith. It's not just the heretic, it's the prodigal. It's somebody who said, I don't want anything to do with that. I'm going to go kind of live my own life mindlessly, enjoyably. And Jesus says, be careful when you categorize somebody that place. Which makes us uncomfortable. Because every one of us has categories in which we have put people. I want you to think about it for a moment. Think about somebody who you love. Maybe it's your mom, maybe it's your dad. Maybe it's your boyfriend. If it's just a couple of weeks, you don't really love him yet, but you think you do. You got him in a category, right? Think about the people you work with and where you've categorized them. That guy that always brings his lunch to his little cubicle that just reeks and you just hate it because it smells terrible. You got a category for that person, right? You got a category for your neighbor whose dog comes down and uses your yard as the restroom, not his yard, You got a category for those drivers that we find in the DMV, right? Everybody has a category for those people, right? But we have these categories, and we put these people in these categories, and Jesus says, be careful about where you put them, how you consider them. Because you're on dangerous ground. Sensitive ground. In fact, if you want your righteousness to exceed those that are sort of this right living kind of approach, those that have captured and sort of taken control of what it means to be devout, you will know that oftentimes the people that are the most devout in their declaration of what it looks like also tend to have a little bit of an anger issue. They're always glad to tell you where you're wrong and where we're right. Because let's face it, it always feels good to be right. Right? So Jesus now takes a step. He's laid this out. Then he gives them some practical sense of how you make this work out. How do we do this, Jesus? How is it possible, not only watch our language, but what do we do in this situation? And Jesus says, okay, so when you present your offering, your sacrifice at the altar, and you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, not that you have something against them necessarily, but they got something against you, leave your offering there at the altar. Now you have to remember something. The altar Jesus is talking about, in this case, was in Jerusalem, a lot of miles away from this hillside. And so he's saying, if you're over there and something comes up and you feel like, whoa, that's right, someone's got an issue with me because I heard somebody else tell me about it, because how the word gets around. And he says you're supposed to leave it there. You're supposed to leave your offering, which you've waited in line to get up to the front to be able to actually offer the offering. This is your place. Took a number. Now you're there. Now you got to say, wait, hold my space, which is not going to be there when you get back, and go all the way back and fix it. In fact, Jesus says, leave it there, go and make peace, that is, be reconciled with that person, and then come and offer your gift, your offering, your sacrifice. And the offering and sacrifice here is not the sacrifice that in the Old Testament talked about for sins. This was the offering. This was an offering for thankfulness. This was a thankful for God, that God's done something good in your life, and so you're there to offer this thanks, this offering, to say thank you, God. And Jesus says, hey, before you say thank you to God, you need to go fix this thing that somebody else has against you, and then you can come back. And he says, that is enough. Here's another way this works out. If your enemy, that is your adversary, that is your accuser, is taking you to court, reach agreement that to settle matters quickly before you go to court. Because your enemy, the adversary, might turn you over to the judge, and the judge might give you to the guard, and then throw you in prison. And Jesus says, here's how this works out. I tell you the truth, you will not, that is, never leave there till you've paid everything you owe. The last penny. So let me see if I got this right, Jesus. Excuse me. Let me see if I got this right. I can't call idiots idiots. I can't classify people who deserve to be classified. And if somebody's got something against me, I don't have anything against them, but they got something against me, I'm supposed to stop what I'm doing, go and get that fixed first, and then I can come back. And if somebody's taking me to court because they think I've done something wrong against them, my job is to try to settle before we get to court. That means I'm going to lose. Is that really how this kind of works out, Jesus? Is that really what it means to be more righteous than the ones who have defined what righteousness looks like? And here's the thing I don't want us to miss. Jesus is confronting us both with the seriousness of our words and the seriousness of our thoughts. This is not just about the big stuff, murder. This is about the stuff that we blow off. When we say how stupid they are. Well, an idiot. Why does somebody drive like that? Which is actually a good question. Don't get me wrong. These are actually good questions. But Jesus is wanting us to face something that's so deep, that is so much a part of us. And that's our emotions. And that's our anger that comes out. And that's the thing that we say, I give free rein here, I don't really mean it. How many of you ever thought, we're going to have a little honesty moment right now. How many of you ever thought or said out loud, either one, I wish that person was dead? Remember, we're in a holy place this morning. If you lie here, it could be bad for the rest of us, right? I'm going to give you one more opportunity. How many of you ever thought or wished somebody else no longer, not necessarily they died a terrible death, but they just no longer were around? Okay, we're getting a little better now. Honesty's coming up in a few weeks, folks, so that may be the one you won't want to miss, all right? And this is not so much what we've heard so often, that, oh, our anger is as bad as murder. That's not what Jesus is talking about here. What Jesus is talking about here is how we deal with our emotions. And this is not Jesus saying, you have an anger problem, you got to get control of that anger problem, and you're bad until you do. That's not Jesus' point. Jesus' point is for all of us to honestly come face to face with the things that go on in our minds, the things that go on in our lives, the things that we feel justified for and sometimes are, the things that we wish would happen, and to ask ourselves, why is this emotion so important to me? Why has it got such a big part of my life? Why, for some of us in this room, is our bitterness over an event, our anger over a situation, our frustration over an ongoing problem, why has it become so big that it literally colors all of our life? See, when Jesus talks about this, and about how we call other people, how we think about other people, how we need to respond to this by going and trying to fix things, we need to respond by trying to, settle before we get to court, even taking a loss, even saying we're guilty when we know we're not guilty, but we just want to get this thing settled. There's a part of us, if we're honest, there's a part of us that is cowardly. And we all experience this. See, we would rather talk about someone than to someone. Isn't that true? And we can talk about others who love to do this, but if we're honest, we kind of do it well. We like to get around people who will support us, who will say, that's right, Lindsay. That's terrible what they did to you. We all gather around and encourage you and say, that's right, it's terrible. Because our desire to be right at times is just as great as those Pharisees who had defined what was right. So let me just kind of wrap up today. Let me talk about some conflict resolution points that I think Jesus is making here. So here's the situation. If you have a difficult interaction with someone, or they do something wrong, I'm going to give you just 10 seconds to get a picture in your mind while I get a drink of water, all right? Because I think a lot of us, the majority of us, probably have a person that when we think of difficult interaction with someone, a picture comes to mind, a face comes to mind. Or they do something wrong. All of us probably have a picture on our wall of our minds of that person who's done us wrong at some point. Everybody got a picture? If you're not sure and your spouse is here today, lean over to them and say, do I have a picture? And if they say yes, it's probably there, right? But here's the thing, conflict resolution. If you have a difficult interaction with someone and they do something wrong, number one, do not tell your 5 best friends. Do not tell your coworkers or their boss. Do not post it to social media. This is what Jesus is after. You need to talk to them, not about them, not around them, but to them. Because Jesus recognizes something that we know at our core, but we're too afraid. We're too much cowards to face it. Now, that is the way I fix a problem between me and you, is by getting me and you in a room together and talking about it. I do not and never can and never will fix a problem by having a problem between me and you and talking about a bunch of other people. Because then you have a problem with a bunch of other people that you may not even know about. Remember both those stories. Jesus' goal in leaving your offering on the altar and going, and his goal in saying, find a guy who's taking you to court and try to fix things up. His goal is not to make things right in the sense of where we think it's fair. His goal is reconciliation. His goal is to get it fixed. And the only way you get it fixed with somebody is actually to be with that somebody. See, our propensity is to talk about people and not to people, because it just feels better that way. And there's something in all of us that just wants a little time. One of the things we have a hard time doing is doing it quickly. Because I want a chance for my emotions, to get a handle on my emotions, which usually means I want to have a chance to kind of go over in my mind different scenarios. Fiery car wreck. Terrible, disgraceful loss of a job because of some terrible thing that they did. Chance to talk to some friends to make sure that I'm right and how I feel about this. When I kind of feel good about all those kinds of things, I've worked out all the scenarios, I've kind of worked through my anger, got to that place, then maybe I'll take that risky move of talking to that person. And the reality is, in our cowardice in this specific area, we have lost friendships, we have lost reputation, we have lost the ability to both experience and to give the grace of God. So here's what Jesus would say. Make the first move. Make the first move. And we don't like making the first move because nobody likes making the first move. In fact, most of us have spent our whole life averting being the first move. We want to be the second one. You know, you're dating somebody, and at some point somebody has to say, hey, you know, I really like you, right, first. But some of us have never been the first one to say it in any relationship we've been in. And then at some point in that relationship, you get to saying those other three words, right? I love you. Right? And some of us have never been the first one to say that because we don't want to get it out too soon. We don't want to have the chance for somebody to say, whoa, you're going too fast, or that's not where I'm at in this thing. And going and fixing things, we want to say, we want the other person to recognize they need to fix it. We want them to come because if they come to us, we sort of feel in power. When Jesus says this is not about power, this is about fixing things. So to make the first move. Secondly, do what you can to make things right with him or her ASAP. That's why he says do this quickly. Because here's the reality. We all believe that the longer we put it off, the better it's going to be, right? How many of you believe that, right? You know, just let some water, you know, some time goes on. Time will heal all things. We got all these statements, great cliches. But we all know from experience that never works, right? In fact, the longer it takes to fix it, people get more hardened in their position. People get more angry about it. People make stories that are much bigger than the initial thing was. I mean, how many times have you ever been where you felt like somebody slighted you or offended you or did something that kind of just ticked you off, and you found out later it had nothing to do with you, it was a mistake, it was an accident, they had no intent, but you made this whole great story about what they were doing and how they were manipulative and how they thought about all this stuff and how they planned it out, and they were just waiting for that moment that you happen to be in the same spot and they could come on. And Jesus' point is fix it as quick as possible. Because anger and bitterness and frustration never gets better over time. It just simmers longer and longer and longer. And lastly, Jesus would say, we need to own your emotions, your actions, and your why. And again, this is not about you have an anger problem, you need to get it fixed. This is not about Jesus shaming us. This is about Jesus trying to help us understand the depth and the power that can happen through forgiveness, that can happen through not making things bigger, but making things smaller. Because the reality is, in all of those things we think about, whether you're in traffic this week, whether you're in one of those meetings this week, whether you're in one of those discussions with a teacher or with a student, one of those moments, you all know that emotions are involved. You all know actions come out of those emotions, and you all know that there's a why behind those things, and we hardly ever get to the why. And sometimes the why is not the thing that you think it is. Sometimes the why has nothing to do with the other person. They're just fortunate enough to be in that spot at the moment. And if you've ever been in that situation, you have no clue what to do. Because you're thinking, why am I getting yelled at for this? I have nothing to do with it. I remember when I was growing up, teenager, I had a brother that's about 3.5 years older. And my brother had moved out of the house, gotten a job as a fireman, and so he would go, well, my brother would always come home. My whole family worked on cars, did a lot of stuff with cars. And so my brother would come home, use my dad's tools, leave them out, grease your stuff, or take my dad's tools away. So when my dad got home and didn't find his tools, do you know who he would yell at? My dad would just go off on me. He would go off on me about my brother, but I'm like, I didn't do anything. I mean, it would get so bad that I would just leave. Because I didn't make sense to me. Now, in hindsight, and with some years of experience and some college and understanding some things, I know what was going on now. But at that moment, it was like, this is not fair. There's always a why. And Jesus wants to understand that why. And here's the point. I want to close on this. God is bigger than the people you encounter. And we need to believe that, and we need to trust that, and we need to live that. Because God is bigger than those people. Even though at this moment, they may see so big that that's all you see. I mean, when I said earlier, get a picture, you not only had a picture, you had a whole portfolio of that person. Right? You can go through the stores. You even had video. Where you're modern age, you got video now, not just still pictures. And I want to remind you again that God really is bigger than the people you encounter. And to believe that. And to let that happen in your life. See, mere practice of the law is inadequate. That was Jesus' point then, and it's his point today. Mere practice of the law is inadequate. Just doing what you're supposed to do is not enough. God has never wanted us to merely obey rules. God is not looking for robots. He's not looking for people who are just faithful to keeping the commandments of God. It's not just about faithfulness. He wants us to value what and who he values. You want to know what and who he values? It's the person that is sitting exactly where you're sitting today. And because he values you. And he values what goes on in your life. And he values also the person sitting next to you. The person sitting in front of you. The person sitting behind you. And he wants us to get to the place where we value the same things he values. I mean, do you think God ever gets frustrated with you? In that frustration, do you ever think he looks at you and thinks, what an idiot? What a moron. How stupid can they be? If you think that, you have missed who God is like. Because while he may get frustrated, and I have no doubt that he gets frustrated with us, he never writes us off. I mean, why would he send his son Jesus to die for you? Just for you to be an idiot. That ought to tell us something about where his heart's at. Where his heart's at towards you. towards you. And what he values is people in all their various forms, and all their various mess-ups, and all their various quirks, and all their various ideas, and all their various situations. And he hopes that someplace we'll get to the same place of valuing others. And that only happens as we participate in his transformation of us. Because God is trying to transfer your life. And he wants us not to be cowards about that, but to step out because he is bigger than those people and wants to prove to us that we can trust him. With that said, I want to invite you to take out that, this is a question we've been asking every week. And so let me ask it as we wind up today. On this particular topic, what do you most need to hear, but least want to do? Is it to stop yelling those things you yell at people or waving at people with not all your fingers on commute time? Is there somebody in your life you know that has something against you and you know you need to go because you've heard how Jesus says it, but I know I need to hear that, but I don't really want to do that? Maybe you got some court situation going on. And to go and try to fix it before it goes to court, you know it's going to cost you something, and it doesn't seem like it's going to cost that other person anything. But what is it that you most need to hear today, but that you least want to do? Because maybe, just maybe, that's why you're here today.